Hello everybody, so welcome to this video on OSCOLA referencing, the referencing system we use here at York Law School. Now just before we get into the main video, I just wanted to give you a heads up about a couple of documents that are in the description below. So what we've put down there is a one-pager, if you like, a bit of an overview of how the system works under OSCOLA with a couple of tips. If you're completely new to OSCOLA referencing or perhaps academic referencing full stop, I'd start just by downloading that one pager and having a flick through. It gives a nice basic overview of how OSCOLA works, the fact that it's footnote referenced, and a couple of tips as well, which we don't cover in the video itself. Now, what we've got alongside that is a quick reference guide, and that's the OSCOLA produced quick reference guide. It's only one page that gives you all the core source formats that OSCOLA uses for things like primary legal sources, so cases, legislation, and secondary sources, so journal articles, books, chapters and edited collections, that sort of thing. After you've got both of those documents and you've had a flick through them, that's probably the best time to think about watching the rest of the video. Now, the video that follows is quite long, and I don't necessarily think that you should watch it all in one sitting. You'd have to be made of strong stuff to watch that much of video on referencing in one sitting, but I've added some timestamps below, so you could maybe jump to particular sections or return to it if you're looking at a source further down the line. So hopefully this is a resource you can come back to. So that all being said, I will head into the main video. Hello everybody. So we've begun to look now in the first year programme at some important academic skills. So information skills in particular, finding cases, finding legislation, looking for secondary sources through Law Trove and Your Search, Westlaw, navigating those other legal databases. The academic skill we're dealing in this video is probably the least exciting academic skill of them all, but it is very important, and that's academic referencing. And that's all about when you take those sources you've found and you want to use them in an assessed task, how you go about citing them and using them within those submissions. Now, the system we use at York, and in common with pretty much every other UK law school, is OSCOLA, so the Oxford University standard for the citation of legal authority. And the idea in this video is to give you a bit of a nuts and bolts overview of how that system works, to take some example sources that you might come across and show you how you'd go about citing those within some academic work, and then give you a couple of tips on what OSCOLA refers to as a Latin gadgets, so navigating between your footnotes, cross-referencing between them, using things like IBID if you're repeating a reference in the footnote above, that sort of thing. So that's the aim of the video, but it's not the only guidance you're going to get on referencing. We're going to be coming back to referencing in the course of some of your first year work as well, but hopefully this will be a useful point of reference for you when you go about putting together your first formative submission, and indeed your very first assessed submission for Foundations in Law 1. Now, just to start with, before I get going on a couple of examples, I know it's extremely tempting, and I empathise with this entirely, because it's exactly what I did as an undergraduate, to Google for OSCOLA reference generators and just use those. And I know why it's tempting, because it means that you can avoid the OSCOLA learning curve, which is a painful learning curve that takes place within the first year of any law course. I'd really caution you against using any of the online reference generators. That's for a few reasons. Firstly, most of them are crap and don't really do a good job of formatting things in an OSCOLA compliant way anyway. The second reason is, even if you're using an online reference generator, unless you're using something quite sophisticated like an EndNote system, you're not going to be in a position where the online reference generator is coordinating cross-references between footnotes. So you're going to have to do that manually anyway. And the third reason is that they're often quite poor at dealing with case law. And students who use online reference generators don't always get into the habit of pinpointing specific sections of judgments and so on. And I'll give you some examples of that later. So I know it's not particularly exciting, and there's loads of other more interesting things to do, like actually read some cases that will be happening over the course of this term. But I'd encourage you to put the time in just to getting your head around how OSCOLA works, because it will save you a lot of time as you move forward in the programme. And by the time you hit second year here at York, you'll be cooking on gas with it by that point. So that all being said, I will get cracking. What I'll do is I'll put some timestamps below in case you want to come back to this video and just look at how certain sources have been dealt with, so you don't have to watch the whole thing again. But let me just I'll pop myself in the corner. So what we've got here is the OSCOLA Bible. So I think you can buy a hard copy version of this. I mean, it's 61 pages long. I do not recommend you read this. I think you would lose the will to live about 5 pages in. but it is a very useful point of reference if you come across a source that you're unsure how to cite. I'll show you the contents of that in a moment, but I'll link to this document below, and I'd recommend just having it in your bookmarks or somewhere else that's handy to keep, so you can come back to it if you need to at any particular point. What I do recommend having and printing off and reading is this quick reference guide. I'll just zoom in slightly on that. Now, if you can print this off and keep this on your desk, this is a really good one-stop shop on all your common sources. So it gives you the principles in relation to cases, in relations to books, in relations to journal articles, all those common sources that you're going to be come at time and time again. And if you've got this within your eye line when you're putting together your submissions, you could just look at the format of these example references and add them into your own work. So I definitely recommend printing this off. If, however, you do decide that you come across a bit of a funky source and you want to look at the principles that apply for instance, a command paper or an excerpt from Hansard or whatever else, then the OSCOLA guide, though it's long and dry, is very good and very clearly set out. And you can see it's divided into general principles. We're going to be coming back to some of this section, the subsequent citation stuff later. You've got a primary sources section. Then you've got materials which run through everything, all different kinds of legislation, both from the UK, from the European Union, and indeed elsewhere. Then you've got sections on all sorts of secondary sources as well. What all of these sections are reusing core OSCOLA principles that we're going to be looking at in the course of this video. So it's not the case you need to know all of this, but if you come across a particular source you're unsure of, it's worth scanning down this contents page and looking at the examples that OSCOLA gives you. So what I'll do, I think it's probably easiest to explain this by actually looking at some examples. So what we'll do is we'll have a look through a series of different kinds of source. So we'll look at journal articles, we'll look at books, we'll look at chapters in edited collections, so chapters that people submit into books edited by another author, and then we'll look at sort of online sources you might be unsure about, for instance online reports. There's a series of examples and I'll talk you through them. So what I will do is load up my thing here. Great. So if we start with journal articles, I'll show you the format of how you would reference a journal article. Then after that, we'll pick a journal article from Westlaw and we'll reference it together. So if you're referencing a journal article, so you've got a secondary source, the principle is this. So you have your author name, comma. I should apologise for my handwriting at this point, but author name. After your author name, you then have your article title in just single speech marks. Then after that, you have the year. So let's say the article was published in 2020, you'd put the year in brackets. And then after that, you have two numbers that would ordinarily follow on the reference. And that's the volume number of the journal submission and the issue number. Now, what happens in journals, so let's say you have a journal published that started being published in 2010. Well, normally, each year that the journal publishes is treated as a volume. So if you've got a journal established in 2010 that was now publishing papers in 2020, it will be volume 10. Right, you've had 10 years worth of submissions. That's ordinarily how journals operate their volume system. But each year, the journal might have multiple issues. So you might have the third issue in that 10th year of the journal in volume 10. Now, OSCOLA asks for the volume number and it asks for the issue. So whether it's the third issue of volume 10, whether it's the first issue of volume 5, whatever it may be. So I will write those in. The volume comes first. Let's pick a different colour. So volume. Then in brackets afterwards comes the issue. So issue. So it would be, say, 10-2, 21, whatever it might be. If the issue is something else other than a number, some journals say do an issue that's an April issue, a March issue, something like that, then you could write the month into that bracket as well, if the journal specifies that as the issue. Again, we'll have a look at how this plays out when I come to an example in a moment. Then we move to the article, the journal title. Now, under OSCOLA, one of the joyful quirks of OSCOLA, and indeed legal referencing, is that OSCOLA requires or has a preference for you using an abbreviation of a journal title. Now, if you've got a law journal, ordinarily law journals have abbreviations, prior abbreviations for the purposes of their use within OSCOLA. And what OSCOLA would want you to do is use the abbreviation. When we come to an example, I'll show you how to find that abbreviation, but the principle is that the journal title goes here. Now, if you're using a non-law journal, there may be no abbreviation for you to use, in which case you have to write out the full journal title. So I will just put in journal title. Journal title, lovely. Now what you need is the first page of the journal. So you've done your name, you've done your article title, year, volume, issue, journal title, then the starting page that the article starts on. So let's say it starts on page, I'll just put the page number. Page number, and that's your starting page number. Then if you were referencing a journal article, but were referencing a quote on there and you wanted to pinpoint a specific page, you would still have your starting page number in the reference, but you would add a separate comma, then your pinpointed page. Oops. Help if I could write pinpointed. Pinpointed page. Lovely. So that's the format for journal articles. What I'll do now is find one on the internet and we can reference it together. So if I, hopefully, if I change this to share my full screen, I will now, I will now pull this out. So I can have that on one side of the screen and then look for an article on the other side of the screen. So lovely. I will just make sure you can see that. Okay, I think you can. So what we'll do is find an article and then we'll just go through that process looking at that particular article. So I'll zoom in slightly on here. So if we go on to, let's go on to Westlaw, go on journals, journal search. Let's have something from the Journal of Social Security Law, Journal of Social Security Law. Lovely, so I'll just pick the first one that comes up from that. It thinks about it. Lovely, so we've got an editorial here from Neville Harris and Grania McKeever. And let's say you've come across this because you've been looking for supporting commentary on a particular submission you're writing, academic submission, and you wanted to reference this. Now, we've got all the information we need here for a reference. So we can begin to map those same principles we've been looking at for referencing an article within OSCOLA onto this submission. So let's have a look. As we've got our authors. So we've got Neville Harris and Grania McKeever. Make sure I spell Grania right. Grania McKeever. Then we have our comma. Then we want our article titles. This is an editorial and it is Social Security in a Pandemic. There we go. Now we want the year, and we can see the year here is 2020. Now we want the volume in the issue number. Now the beauty about finding sources on Westlaw is that they're pre-formatted for you in a really nice way. So you can see you've got volume 27, issue 2. Otherwise, if you were looking at something like Hein Online, you still get the same information. It might just be formatted slightly differently, or it might say vol for volume number instead, or be listed as volume and issue. But you can see in Westlaw, we get them lovely laid out for us. So we've got volume 27 and issue 2. So that means it's the second issue of the 27th edition of the journal. 2. Now what we want to do is go to the title of the journal. So in this case, we've got the Journal of Social Security Law. Now again, in Westlaw, you get that the abbreviation for you for use in OSCOLA, so JSSL in this case for Journal of Social Security Law. But let's say you're coming across a journal elsewhere, you found one referenced somewhere in Law Trove or through a textbook, or indeed through Hein Online or some other database, and you're looking for an abbreviation. The way in which you would find an abbreviation is through a resource which is a Cardiff system. It's effectively a Cardiff index of abbreviations for journal articles. So if you go Cardiff legal abbreviations, it's the Cardiff index to legal abbreviations that you're after. And you can search your article title, so we've already got Journal of Social Security Law in there, here. And that then brings up the preferred abbreviation for that particular journal. You can work backwards, so if you see an abbreviation that you want to search, you can search for it here, and that will pull back the article that abbreviation's for, but I suspect you'll mostly be using it this way around. So you've got JSSL, so we've got the abbreviation, which is already given us to in Westlaw, but it's good to see how to do it if they can't, so we can add that in. So let's go for Lilac, SSL, lovely. Now what we want is the starting page. So if we go back, we can see the article starts on page 37, so we put the pinpointed page. I'll just move this here so you can see that. In red, 37. Lovely. And let's say we were referencing a particular part of this submission. So let's say we were looking at, we wanted to quote this bit here about the minimum income floor for the self-employed. Well, that's on page 39. So then what we do is add a comma and put our pinpointed page, which in this case is page 39. And that's your reference for a journal article. And you can see all I've been doing here is going back through the principles laid out within the OSCOLA Quick Reference Guide, so using that same format. Now, if you can't get the volume number and the issue number for a particular journal, so let's say that information is not available, you can do what's done here, which is simply put the year in square brackets. This is a journal called Public Law. Put the year in square brackets, then you can omit the volume and issue number. But best practice is to use the volume and issue number. Here for the LQR you can see they've just used the volume number. But as I say, best practice is volume and issue if you've got that information. If there isn't a volume and issue number, then you can use square brackets. But that's the principle for journal articles. So let's have a look at books. Books are really easy. So I'll talk you through the process. I'll just maximize that. I'll talk you through the process for books, and then we'll find a book and reference that together as well. So the principle for books is you have your author name, comma, then you have the title of the book in italics. I'm going to try and write in italics best I can. Book title, so that's my attempt at italics. Then if it has an edition, you'd put the edition in. So if you say you're doing a textbook that's a few editions in, you'd put the edition here. But obviously, if it's you don't need to specify if it's the first edition. It may not be the sort of book that has multiple editions, so you can leave that out if there isn't an edition there. Then you want the publisher. Then you want the year of publication. And that is it. If you were going to specify a page at that point, you would add the page onto the end, so a pinpointed page, for instance. So if you were referencing a particular point on a page, then you would add that there. But otherwise, it's just that core author name, book title, edition if there is one, publisher, and year. So let's minimize that, and we'll go on to Law Trove. And let's just take the first one we've got. So this administrative law textbook. And let's say you wanted to reference a particular part of this textbook. When it decides to load. I'm in a block of flats, and I think everyone goes on the internet at the same time in this place. Right, so we have the author name. So it is Timothy and Co. Lovely. And then a comma. Then we've got the book title, which is administrative law. So again, I'm going to try and write that in italics. Administrative Law. Lovely. Now we've got 4th edition, so that now goes in brackets. Now we open up our bracket treatment of this. So it is, I'll just put that there so I make sure I don't go off the page. 4th edition, comma. Then we want the publisher. Now, it's the case that for everything in Law Trove, it's the Oxford University Press, OUP, and you can see the information here. So we're going to use the abbreviation for OUP. It doesn't matter too much if you don't, to be frank, but we'll use the abbreviation here. So OUP, Oxford University Press, and then we've got the year of publication, which is 2018, so print publication date. If there's 2 separate dates, print publication and published online, you'd ordinarily go for the print publication date, but here we can see it's the same year. So we'll put in here 2018, lovely. Now if you were citing a particular page of this, then you just add in the number at the end of there. So if you were, say you wanted to reference pages, say page 2 for part of the introduction, you could put 2 here, or indeed if you were citing multiple pages, 2 to 3 if you were citing on a range. So that's how you do a book. Books are super easy and quite straightforward. So sometimes you'll come across a book, but actually there's multiple authors within the book. It's what we'd refer to as an edited collection. So you've got a couple of editors who've put the book together, then a series of individual people who have written the chapters within the collection. Now, they're referenced slightly differently because, of course, the author of the chapter you'll be citing is not necessarily the author of the book. So there's a different way of doing those, and I will show you an example of one. So if we go into your search, we will go for the Handbook of Empirical Legal Studies, which is an Oxford University Press handbook, which I think we have online access to. And then we can pluck a chapter out of there and I'll show you how you'd go about referencing that. God, internet is on the go slow today. It's only when I want to do videos it goes slowly. I'll just try reloading that up. Let's put Oxford Handbook in to help it out a little bit. Oxford Handbook of Empirical Legal Research. There we go. Probably me getting the title wrong didn't help. Lovely, here we go. So we've got online access to this. And you can see this is a book edited by Peter Kane, but we'll have submissions from other authors in there as well. Lovely, so let's go Oxford Handbooks Online. And we'll just pluck a chapter out of here and I'll show you the principle and then we'll reference it. Right, while that's loading up, I will talk you through what the process would be for referencing a chapter in an edited book. So what we do is we start again with the author name, but this is the author name of the person who's written the individual chapter. So let's pull that down slightly. So we've got chapter author. There we go. Now you want the title of that individual chapter. And you do that in the same way as if you were doing the title of a journal article. So you've just got it in the little individual speech marks, and then we're going to say, so chapter title. Great. Then what we say is in to indicate that that's in a book that's been edited by somebody else, and then we add the editor's name. And you may have multiple editors, in which case you'd put multiple editors' names in. So editor's name. And then after that, to indicate they're the editors, we just do a little eds. Like that. Then after that we have a comma. Then we treat it as we would do if we were finishing off a normal book. So you have your book title in italics. Then you have the publisher as we open up the brackets. And the year. And again, if there was an edition, you'd add the edition in there just before the publisher as well, like we did with the book. after that point, if you're editing a particular chapter, it's also good to put the page range. So if the chapter was on pages 20 to 24, for instance, you'd put the range. Page range. And then again, if you wanted to pinpoint, the pinpoint comes after that. Pinpoint. So if you wanted to mention a particular page within that range that you're citing in the piece you're putting together. So that's how it works when you've got a chapter that someone's written who's not the book author with an edited collection, and I will give you an example of that in this Oxford Handbook here. So let's say, let's use, is there one by Mike Adler in here? I think there is somewhere. Yeah, let's use Mike Adler. Keep on the social security theme. So we've got here a chapter by Mike Adler called Social Security and Social Welfare. And we've got, I think, all the information that we need. We've got page numbers here as well, so that's great. So let's reference that one. So if we take here the author of the chapter, which is Michael Adler, comma, then we want the title of the chapter itself, which we can see here is Social Security and Social Welfare. Social Security and Social Welfare, lovely. Then we go in, because it's in a book, in, and then the title of the book is the Oxford Handbook of Empirical Legal Research. So that title goes in, oh, oops, in Oxford, I'm trying to write in italics, Handbook of Empirical Legal Research. I wish I'd chosen a book with a shorter title. Empirical Legal Research, lovely. Then we have the open up the brackets and begin to add our bracketed information in. So we've got the publisher, which is also in this case Oxford University Press. So we just add OUP in. UP, and then we've got the year, which is 2012. You can see we've got all print publication dates. So 2010 in this case, we'll use the print publication date of 2010. Now I'll add in is the range for the chapter. So we can see it starts on 399, conclusions start on 420, and it looks like it's over by the end of 420. We've got any other page numbers here? Yeah, so let's put till 420. So we'll take 399. We come back on here. 399 to 420. And if we were citing a particular page within that range, we'd just add that pinpoint in. So let's say we were referencing something on page 320, we'd add that in there. So that's how you'd reference a chapter in an edited collection. So a book that's edited by somebody else but has a series of individual chapters written by other authors within it. So, well done for making it this far for one. You're made of strong stuff. There's one more format that I want to look at before I move on to cases and legislation very briefly, because they're quite straightforward, and the Latin gadget. So the last one I want to look at is the sort of submission you might get when you're not quite sure what to do about it. So it might be a slightly funky online source, it's a report, it might be something else, and you've looked at the OSCOLA guidance and you're not quite sure, is it a website, is it something else? I want to give an example of how you might treat a source like that. So we're lucky in York that we've got the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which is a think tank down near the train station, Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So an example of the sort of thing you might come up with here is if you're looking for say you come across a report by a think tank or something else like that, and it's not really a website, but it's not a book, and I'll show you the principles of how that would work. So let's have a look for any reports they've had published. More reports. So let's go for this one. Making work more secure. Fantastic. So I'll talk you through the principles, then we will reference this report. So the general principle, if you've got a source along these lines, is to deal with your author. So identify the author or authors of the piece. So author. It could be in circumstances that the author's an organisation if there's no named authors, but ordinarily for this sort of format you'd have some sort of named author on a report or anything of this sort of line. Then you have the title. Then you open your brackets and we'll have the organisation. As if it were the publisher in the context of putting a book together. Then you'd add a comma and the date. So comma, then the date. Then what you do at this point is add the web link in for that resource, and you do that with those little triangle more than less than signs. So I'll just go under the page there. So there, web link. Then you add a access date, so a last access date. So oops, I'll do that in a different colour. Okay, and I'll show you how to format that in a moment. And the format I'm following for this is the format that OSCOLA uses for online sources. So you can see they've got here examples of websites and blogs, and you can see how this is formatted. You've got the name, you've got the title of the thing, you've got the sort of organisation that published it, you've got the date, the web address, then an access date. So let's do it for this. So we've got here a report, we've got a couple of authors. If we download the briefing document and have a look at that. Great, so we've got our title, we've got our authors, and we'll have a web link as well. We've got a date, so what have we got? July 2020. We've got everything we need to be able to put this together. So if we come back onto here. So our authors here are Rebecca MacDonald and Alina Sandor. So we'll add those in. Rebecca MacDonald and Alina Sandor. Great, then we've got our title. So making work secure. Out of laziness, I will just write that, but you get the idea. Making work secure, lovely. Then after that, just following the same thing, we've got the organisation, which in this case is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So we'll open up our brackets. Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Now you'll see with organisations you generally put that within italics for the organisation title as well. But my handwritten italics are not too good. But you can see in the format for the OSCOLA cheat sheet, it has the organisation title in italics. Then after that, we have the date. And you provide as much of the date as you can. In this case, we can see it's July 2020, so that more than suffices for our purposes. July 2020. Great. Then we add the web link. So obviously I won't type this out now. Web link. Then the access date. So I'll just put accessed. Oh, I'll do it in the same colour for consistency. So access, say 1st of September 2020. Okay, lovely. And that's your reference for your online source. So the sort of source that you might come across that might be an online report or somewhere else, and those are the principles you're following. Just before I turn to cases, I just want to give a little tip on the use of web links when you're citing this sort of source. So obviously you can see here that because it's a PDF, it's actually downloaded the file. Obviously that's a completely useless web link for anybody because it's my internal file path to the PDF. But instead, what you could do is copy the link from the button you downloaded the report from. And often you get quite unwieldy links by virtue of doing that. So if you head on to a service like tinyURL, and there's some others as well, you can paste your longer web link in, make tiny, and then you get a smaller link for inclusion within your references rather than having to use a long link. Now that link's not actually too bad, but some of the ones you come across are absolutely horrendous. So this is a nice way of making sure your footnotes are not eaten up by really, really long URL links. So that's everything in terms of the secondary sources, but as I say, your cheat sheet and the thing to really look at is this here, the quick reference guide. And if you're unsure about any particular source, you can have a look in the main guide to see if it's covered, and if not, follow the principles which have been outlined really for websites and blogs, so you can cite sources like reports and so on. Great, so let's touch on case law briefly. Case law is relatively straightforward, as is most primary legal sources. Obviously, as you go through the program, you'll start to identify some more difficult forms of primary legal sources. But for our purposes in the first year, most of your citation is going to be of decisions from sort of the High Court upwards, really. So that's fairly straightforward. And we will return to issues of more complicated pieces of law when we go through the program. So particularly, for instance, decisions from foreign courts, but we don't need to cover that for our purposes now, and there's plenty of guidance within the OSCOLA handbook if you need to do that at any point. But we can see the principle here. You get your party names in italics, then you have what's known as sort of the neutral citation, then you have a citation from the law reports. And I'll show you how to find this information through Westlaw when we take an example case. But what you have, party names in italics, your neutral citation, then your law reports citation. So let's head on to Westlaw and I'll show you how to identify that. Have I got a Westlaw tab open? I have. So let's pick a case. Let's go for HOTAC. So parties, we'll go HOTAC against Southwark. Lovely. Okay, so this was a homelessness case in the Supreme Court a few years ago now, all about the meaning of vulnerability under the Housing Act. So if we go on to Southwark, or HOTAC, I should say. So we can see we've got the party names. This was actually a joint appeal. They pulled 3 cases together, and we've got a series of where reported sort of sets them aside, and we've got the year here for the judgment date. Now I'm actually going to show you this not handwritten but in a document instead. So if you're referencing this HOTAC against Southwark, what you do is, so you've got your sentence where you're doing your analysis. So let's say it's, I should change my font for that. Times New Roman 12 without the bold. This principle was subject to judicial scrutiny. Very vanilla reading the sentence there, but just to give us something to reference. You would then add in your footnote, because as we've looked at within our written resources, OSCOLA is a footnote-based system. You then add your case names. So in this case, HOTAC against Southwark. So in we go. And as we've seen, that is italicized. Then you add in your neutral citation. So your neutral citation is the one that's tied to the court rather than being tied to a law report. Those institutions and publications which have traditionally done the write-ups of law reports and published the decisions. So our neutral citation here is, we can see 2015 UK Supreme Court 30. And normally within Westlaw that would be the top submission. So you'll either get the Court of Appeal reference, the High Court reference, whatever court was dealing with it, the year, and then the number afterwards. So I'm going to add that in here. And that's not italicized. And you can see if we go back onto this OSCOLA quick reference guide, you can see this is the House of Lords decision before the House of Lords became the Supreme Court. That's your neutral citation, followed by a comma, and then you have a law report citation. So we go a comma here, back into Westlaw. Now, within Westlaw, you'll get an order of different law reports which have published this decision. Now, ordinarily, they're done in order of prestige, if you like. So we've got here appeal cases and then the weekly law reports. Ordinarily, you would reference whichever was the top one, but to be frank, it doesn't matter too much which one you're citing. Normally, the ones higher up tend to be seen as being more prestigious, and by that way, they're the ones you would ordinarily reference. So for this case here, let's go for appeal cases. So paste that in, and that there is your case citation at the bottom. Neutral citation, your law report citation. But let's say that you're wanting to cite a particular paragraph or paragraphs of the decision. So if we go into the reported case here, so I'll just open up the PDF. And if you think back to when we've looked at reading cases, we've looked about the format of these reports in a little bit more detail. But for our purposes, I'm just going to skip to a chunk of the decision, and then I'll show you how you would pinpoint a particular paragraph. But if you want a bit more guidance on reading cases, do go and look again at our reading cases video resource. But let's get to a bit where we're actually in the decision. So here we've got Lord Nuremberger's lead judgment in the case, and let's say we want to reference paragraph 3 because that's the point at which a particular issue was considered, which is unlikely to happen in the third paragraph of a decision, but for illustration purposes we could show you that. So what you would do is put the paragraph or paragraphs you want to do in square brackets. So this is paragraph 3. Then, given that we're citing the lead judgment of Lord Nuremberger, we'd then put Lord Nuremberger in brackets there. And that's how you would pinpoint a particular paragraph in a case. If you were dealing with multiple paragraphs you wanted to cite, you can just add those in as follows. So let's say we're also doing 4 to 5, for instance, and 62. You could just add them in like that for as long as you want. And indeed, if you wanted to reference any additional paragraphs, for instance, from a dissenting judgment or from another judgment of a court, you could then add that after this as well. So you can cite multiple judges within the same reference. Again, more guidance on how you style references to individual justices is available in the handbook. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but over time you'll end up picking up how to treat different justices at different levels of the court when you're pinpointing paragraphs. You can omit references to the judge altogether if you want to. You can just use the paragraph numbers, though I think if you're doing the 4 references, it's good to put the justice involved as well. Now, in terms of legislation is very straightforward. I'm not going to provide an example of that, but you can see within the statutes and statutory instruments chunk here how that would be done within a footnote. So you have your information, then your section after that, effectively. You can see with statutory instruments, you would also provide the statutory instrument number after the year. For Acts of Parliament, you just provide the year and then whatever section number you're dealing with, if you are dealing with a section number. So that's a bit of a scattergun overview of how different sources work within OSCOLA. As I say, this quick reference guide is really a great thing to have on hand for going through those as you come across individual sources. What I want to do now is just give a couple of examples on tips for how you might go about cleaning up footnotes. So we've got here just a random couple of paragraphs which we've added in some footnotes in at the end as if this were a student submission. And what I want to deal with are some of those things which are dealt with in the contents of the OSCOLA 4th edition as subsequent citations, cross-references and Latin gadgets, and give you 1 or 2 tips on those. So here you can see we've got somebody citing this freedom of speech textbook, and then we've got the Campbell case for that Naomi Campbell. So it's notionally an assessment about freedom of speech. Now, even though the references for these are fine, so we've got the book cited accurately, we've got the case cited accurately as well, they could do a lot more to save repasting these footnotes, repasting the references in full throughout the footnotes. And what OSCOLA does for this is it provides you opportunities to do cross-referencing, what's known as Latin gadgets. So you can see under cross-references and subsequent citations, if we scoot down to page 5, you've got a series of guidance as to how you would reference things that follow in subsequent footnotes. And what we use is a cross-referencing system using n followed by the number of that footnote. So I'll show you how this works. So if we take these examples here, we've got the textbook mentioned here and again here, and it's mentioned at a different page. Now we can see that's footnote 2. So we take the surname of the author. We then give the number, so we do n and then 2 because it's mentioned in footnote 2. Then, because the page is different, what we're doing is we're asking the reader to look to footnote 2. But footnote 2 is pinpointed at page 230 of the text, so we want to reference here 235. So we do n2 to cross-reference to footnote 2. Then we add in the new page number because it's a different page number to the cross-reference footnote, n2. Same principle applies to cases. So if we've got Campbell here against Mirror Group newspapers, we're using that again, and this time we're pinpointing a particular paragraph of the decision which we didn't pinpoint within reference 2. So within footnote 3. So again, exactly the same process. So we go n 3, and then we would leave the paragraph reference in because we haven't pinpointed the same paragraph or any paragraph at all. within this reference that's held within footnote 3. If you were referencing it exactly the same, then you would just use N3 without the need to make an additional pinpoint. So let's say that you're then referencing. So let's say you're referencing Campbell again in footnote 4 here. How would you handle that under OSCOLA? Well, OSCOLA also uses the IBID function. So you can see it gives examples here where you can IBID in the way that people might be familiar with from other referencing systems. So if we were referencing Campbell here, we could simply put IBID, not entirely, it's IBID, to reference it again. And if we're referencing it again under that, but with a different paragraph, we could still write IBID for as long as we were referencing the submission just underneath it. So if you're referencing the one directly above, you can go IBID and IBID without having to cross-refer to the immediate footnote above. Now, the final thing I want to say on this is, because it can get, insofar as a lot of the submissions you're going to be doing within the first year, it's not too problematic in that you're not doing very long submissions. You're normally writing for 1,500 words, 2,000 words, at the very most 2,500 in some cases, but you're not really going for very long submissions. However, if you're writing essays of 3,000, 3,500 words as you move through the program, it can get a little bit annoying to have to keep reorganizing the numbers in the cross-referencing. So a little trick for that, which it might be worth knowing, is let's say we're going to be cross-referencing this again, and we're going to add our N number in. So let's go this one here, portrait, and we get ready to do our cross-reference, and that's the same page as in footnote 2, so we don't need to add that. You can go N, then you can insert a cross-reference for that footnote number. So if I go here, insert, I think I need to open this up slightly, cross-reference, and then you can give a reference to a particular footnote and reference that particular footnote number. So this is footnote number 2, insert, lovely, and then you can close that up. And what you have here is a little automatic reference to that number tied to the specific footnote. So if you go in and add an additional footnote ahead of that one, and that becomes footnote 3, or it becomes footnote 4, when you refresh your cross citations, your cross references, it will refresh that number there. And you can refresh your cross references by pressing F9 once you've selected your footnotes. So I'll just show you how that would work. So let's say ahead of the second footnote, I'll just add an extra footnote in here, so you can see the cross reference becomes to footnote 3 instead of to footnote 2. But because we've added this in a cross reference, if we select all our footnotes, so Control and A or Edit and Select All, press F9 to refresh the footnotes, it will then prompt you that you can't undo it, and you can see our reference to N2 above becomes N3 above. And that can save a bit of time if you're working on a longer submission and you're somebody who fiddles around with stuff in the same way that I tend to. So that's everything I wanted to cover in this. It was a bit of a whistle-stop, a granular tour of footnoting under OSCOLA, but hopefully it's enough to give you a bit of an introduction and serve as a point of reference if you need to come back to any of this stuff. As I say, I've added timestamps below, and there's a written resource that goes along with this video as well, so you've had a little bit of a introduction to OSCOLA, albeit it's something that we'll be coming back to over the course of this term as well. I'd encourage you to stick with it as you're doing your assess tasks. I know it takes a lot of getting used to, but once you've got used to those key source formats, which really are only 4 or 5 or so that you're going to be using routinely, it saves you a lot of time throughout the program. So if you've made it all the way to the end in one sitting, congratulations. I don't think you'll come across a video that's quite as dry as this anytime soon in the program, or hopefully not anyway. If there's any concerns about it, or anyone's still a bit confused about what OSCOLA referencing is or how it works, you're very welcome to get in touch and drop me an email, and I'm happy to advise. But I think it's worth having a go, giving it a go within your formative submission, the one you're giving to your senior partner within Foundations in Law as well. And once you get up to speed with it, you'll be cooking on gas for the rest of the program. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I will see you again soon.